One day, the world as we knew it suddenly came to an end. The pandemic, war, and economic collapse are to blame. However, it was not humans themselves who put an end to humanity. These were game characters, in other words, monsters. Eventually, superhumans emerged, but they too were not strong enough to end the apocalypse. After 3 days, our main character, James, thought that the world had not yet come to an end. The thing is, he was still living a normal life, but he was all alone. All his relatives were outside, and he lived in the apartment alone. His father bought the place with a huge loan and mortgaged all the property. But now James must live here for 2 years so that his family can receive a tax deduction. However, now he was locked down due to the apocalypse, without communication or internet. Suddenly, the main character heard a terrible scream from somewhere outside. When he looked up, he saw a terrifying monster outside his window. At one point, he thought that the end had come for him. But suddenly, everything went quiet. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of James, warning him of danger. Then he realized that he survived solely because of this thing. After this, the hero tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The boy clearly realized that this system that protected him also locked him in. The system kept repeating about the danger, and this began to greatly irritate the hero. James realized that he was absolutely powerless in this situation. Although James was safe, his real problem was food. The refrigerator was turned off, and the remaining food began to spoil. There were only a few packs of noodles left in the apartment. Suddenly, a notification appeared in front of him that he had received experience for killing a level 23 creature. Coming out onto the balcony, James saw the body of a huge flying monster below. There was a crowd of armed goblins around him. The hero began to realize that he had killed the monster as it crashed into his house. The system also reported that James had gained a new skill, and the loot calculation had begun. At this point, the goblins started to act strangely. They screamed, grabbed their heads, and furiously tore at the monster's carcass. When the calculation of the loot was completed, James received more than 2 million won. Along with the money, the electricity in the apartment was turned back on. The hero looked up in amazement when the lamp above his head turned on. The system also confirmed that all functions of the house have now been restored. The first thing the hero did was check the refrigerator, and fortunately, it worked. James cried with joy, because now everything was as before. After that, he looked at the phone with hope. However, there was still no internet, and this undoubtedly upset him. James found a flash drive nearby and decided to see what was on it. It turned out that there were photographs there, his school photos and photos with his parents. However, it was morally difficult for the hero to look at them now. But these memories awakened in him the determination to save his family and bring them here. He walked up to the balcony and decided to test his new skills. Among them was a store of the absolute recluse, where one could buy goods. The store offered to make him a list of things, and also showed him his balance. He didn't fully understand how it worked, but he decided to give it a try. Also, although the hero's skill level had increased, he still could not go outside. But if he hunts monsters, he will gain a new skill. One day the hero will gain a skill that will allow him to go outside. James didn't know how to kill monsters, but he hoped that such a situation would not happen again. Then the hero decided that he could kill them without even leaving the room. Without thinking, James grabbed the water bottle and threw it off the balcony. At that moment he realized that he couldn't get out himself. But things passed through the barrier. He searched the entire apartment for weapons, and found a dumbbell. At that moment the hero realized that there was still hope. But looking out from the balcony, he saw that the goblins had begun to leave. Panic gripped James. If they left, he wouldn't be able to gain experience. Then he quickly swung and threw the dumbbell down. The dumbbell flew over the barrier, but unfortunately fell on the monster's carcass. The goblins went berserk, and then James knew he was finished. He had one last dumbbell left, and the chance of pumping was melting away before his eyes. There was nothing suitable in the house, and he simply couldn't lift a TV or a computer. Suddenly, there was a deafening roar outside. There was a crowd of goblins outside. At their head stood James's dumbbell in his hand. After this, the crowd rushed forward, straight to the main character's house. James recoiled for a moment, but realized the situation wasn't that bad. He opened the system and activated the recluse's magazine. The system asked James to place the required items in the list. Without thinking twice, he decided to add his last dumbbell there. The system scanned it and showed the price. It was the same as when I bought it. James could now buy as much of this product as he wanted, as long as he had money. Without wasting any time, he ordered 2 more dumbbells. Suddenly, dumbbells materialized in front of him, as if they had been printed on a 3D printer. James was very happy that his plan worked. He took aim and threw one dumbbell down. It split the goblin's head. The system immediately notified him of the experience gained for killing the goblin. James was delighted, and continued to throw dumbbells at the monsters. However, this time the goblins managed to dodge, and this angered the hero. Then he bought some more dumbbells from his recluse shop. The dumbbells kept splitting the goblins' skulls. Their blood was everywhere. Soon the hero waited for the long-awaited notification about receiving a new skill. Without wasting any time, James activated the skill. A panel appeared in front of him, and he sent the remaining dumbbells into storage. They disappeared, and when James checked the interface, he saw them all listed. When he tried to summon one, a dumbbell materialized in his hand. At that moment, a sinister plan began to form in the hero's head. Then the hero put his palm in front of him and began to carry it out. He summoned hundreds of dumbbells from his vault. They hung in the air. Then hundreds of dumbbells came crashing down, crushing the goblins. The goblin leader could only watch in horror as dumbbells rained down on them. Soon, everyone was killed, and the hero received a large amount of experience and money. James ended up adding dumbbells, food, and essentials to the storage. However, he suddenly noticed that his balance was down by 1-1. He didn't understand why this happened, because saving life is free. The hero quickly realized that these were bills for electricity, gas, and water. It was because of the refrigerator, and James decided that it was a hassle. After the dumbbell attack, the goblins fled and abandoned their former home. Now the hero was thinking about who else he could kill for experience points. Outside, he saw only the severed head of a monster with a beak. Then he realized that he would have to find some other way. James hoped that he would get lucky and a stupid calican would fly here. Suddenly, high in the sky, he saw some kind of bird-like creature. As it approached, the hero realized that it was that very monster, the calican. Realizing that there was still hope, James immediately ran back. Soon, he brought a clothes dryer with a frying pan glued to it onto the balcony. With this design, he tried to reflect light into the monster's eyes. Soon, the calican noticed him and rushed with an open mouth straight at the hero. Then James realized that his plan had worked. The monster hit the barrier hard, and the hero realized that at this rate, the job was in the bag. He will definitely be able to level up if he kills this creature. However, suddenly the calican began to flap its wings madly. When James opened his eyes, he realized that the monster in front of him was no longer there. To his surprise, the monster was sitting right above his window, clinging to the walls with its claws. After this, he again struck the barrier with his beak with great force. The system kept reporting about a creature trying to break through. James desperately hoped that the calican wouldn't be able to break through. Realizing he had to do something, he opened a store. The hero noted that the loot count was if the corpse was nearby. James's goblin hunt was not successful. Some survivors took the bodies of their fallen comrades, and they were not counted. If the distance exceeded the limit, loot counting did not occur. James didn't want to let this happen, and decided to somehow kill the calican with one blow. Suddenly, canola oil caught his attention and he decided to buy 10 bottles at once. Soon the system provided him with the required number of bottles. After this, James began to boil the butter and wound the cloth onto a stick. He then dipped the stick into the boiling oil and asked the system to open the store. He added boiling oil directly to the system's inventory. James then held the lit lighter to the oil-soaked torch. Now in his hand was a homemade burning torch. Meanwhile, the monster was still sitting right above his balcony. The protagonist began screaming, attracting the monster's attention, and then summoned canola oil. At that moment, the oil poured directly onto the monster, and it screamed in pain. Then the protagonist pointed a burning torch at him. He began to beat the monster with a burning stick. At that moment, James realized that his plan had succeeded. Soon the monster fell down, and his body was still burning with a bright fire. After some time, he made his last sound and died. After this, the system reported that the loot count was complete. James received over 9 million into his account, and it shocked him. Suddenly, he received a message that the expansion of the house territory had begun. Then James felt the whites of his eyes suddenly start to turn dark. Then everything around seemed to change colors, and a sharp pain pierced him. Then he saw in front of him a family of parents and 2 children who were in the apartment. James was very surprised to see some people. He guessed that they were neighbors from a nearby house. The hero could not understand what was happening, but at that moment the dark aura dissipated. The system then asked him if he wanted to give citizenship to these people. The system also warned that beings who did not receive citizenship would be expelled from the home. James knew that if they did, they might be at risk from monsters. Then he asked the system to give these people citizenship. Now James decided to gain other skills that were related to citizenship. He asked the system to show him the skills available to him. Among them, he saw an achievement in which he needed to recruit 600 people. However, the hero thought that this amount was too large. However, he could control every resident and how they distributed resources. Then James realized that this was the only way he could become stronger. He also realized that he could give citizens some quests. One of the quests required the citizen to kill 1 goblin, and for this he would receive experience. James also set the punishment for failure to be death. However, at the last moment he cancelled his request. The hero realized that if he wanted, he could kill his citizens at any time. Now such power was completely in his hands. However, he didn't know what to do with this power. He then activated the absolute eye skill, and his eyes turned black again. He realized that he could now again see the family he had seen before. The woman asked her husband what they should do now. Her husband, Sam, told her that he needed to get water and that Hannah should stay with the children. The woman was unhappy with this decision and did not even know where the water was. As it turned out, Sam wanted to sneak into the nearest store. Then their daughters, Clara and Sonia, said they were thirsty. At that moment, Sam realized that he had no other choice. So he asked Hannah to wait for him and promised to bring something. After this, the main character turned off his skill. He realized that the situation was much worse than he thought. So he turned to the system and asked to open the skills window. He decided to increase the shop skill level with joy on his face. Now his store has become second level, and the prices in it have decreased. James noted that this was good news and he had 2 points left. He decided that it was worth investing in the store and maintaining his dignity. There was also a feature that could restore old items and turn them into new ones. So James decided that upgrading the store was a good idea. Then he decided to buy water and tangerines, and also to increase the level of other skills. He thought that if he provided his neighbors with electricity and water, he could ask them for something in return. Suddenly, the system informed him that he could register vassals. Meanwhile, Sam left his apartment. Finally, he said goodbye to his wife and children. Clara and Sonia were very scared that their father was leaving. Clara suddenly started crying and said that there were monsters outside. She remembered how she had recently played in the sandbox with her sister. At that moment, they saw a crowd of monsters running towards them. The girls froze in horror and didn't know what to do. However, their parents caught them in time and carried them to a safe place. Sam remembered this moment with horror and did not want it to happen again. Meanwhile, Hannah calmed her daughters and asked them not to cry. Sam realized that this might be the last time he saw them. However, at that moment, they suddenly heard a strange sound outside. A voice came from behind the door, asking for the door to be opened for him. Sam held his stick out in front of him, intending to defend himself. The girls closed their mouths, but the voice continued to ask to be let inside. Suddenly, all sounds died down, and Sam thought that the stranger had left. However, at that moment, the door suddenly opened sharply. Sam immediately rushed to his daughters and wife to cover them with his body. He shouted at the stranger not to dare touch his wife and children. However, James suddenly appeared on the threshold with a bag in his hands. Sam looked at him in surprise and asked who he was. James introduced himself and said that he lived next door. He brought tangerines and water and suggested that they talk after they ate and drank. At this point, Hannah and the girls began to calm down a little. Sam decided that they had no reason to refuse such help. Then he stood up and asked James to come inside. Soon after, the 5 of them sat down at the table, but the girls were still scared. James noted that they had blackout curtains, which made sense. This really reduced the likelihood of monster attacks. Then he decided that he would turn on the light first, and for this he used his skill. Suddenly the light in the room came on, and people were very surprised by this. Then James asked to give water to the children first. Sam obediently handed a bottle of water to Clara and Sonia. The girls were so thirsty that they even choked on the water. Then James decided to give them some tangerines as well. At first, the girls were very shy and hardly wanted to accept them. However, they were very hungry, and Hannah peeled the tangerines for them. First, she fed Sonia. The girl was overjoyed when she tasted the delicious fruit. Then Clara came up to her and asked her to give her some too. When she tasted the tangerine, a smile appeared on her face. The system told James that all the residents had increased trust in him. Moreover, Clara fulfilled all the requirements to be made a vassal. However, James knew that she was too young. He could only register 10 vassals, and decided that they must be people with some skills. However, Sam's trust in him was only 31. James decided that the level of trust needed to be raised. Then Sam turned to him and thanked him for his kindness. He didn't know how to thank James, but he offered him an option. When they came outside, he asked him if he had received citizenship. Sam replied that his family had received this notification 30 minutes ago. At that moment, they could not move for some time. James realized that they were frozen until they received citizenship. Then he told Sam that he would help him return to his past life. He explained that he could prevent the monsters from invading their home. However, Sam doubted that this was possible. He understood that this was not a free service. James said that Sam could lose his life trying to repay him. But Sam confidently replied that he simply had to do it. He was already planning to go outside and had already put his life on the line. James asked him how much his golf club cost. Sam remembered that it cost about 500,000 won. It was too expensive for James to add to the list. So he said it was a trifle and asked him to forget about it. He asked if Sam remembered when the monsters appeared. Sam remembered it happened over the weekend and it was horrible. According to James, those who stayed home that day survived. He understood that one goblin did not have much power. Their real strength was that they moved in groups. However, the same could be said about people. So first, James needed to grow his own army. He told Sam that from now on he wanted him to join him in searching for survivors. Sam's trust in him soon grew again. James decided that if he continued to accept people, he would soon be able to meet his family. Suddenly he heard a strange sound from somewhere outside. When James looked out from the balcony, he was extremely shocked. Outside there was a group of people surrounded by goblins. However, it would be difficult for James to help them now. At that moment, one of the people dealt a crushing blow to the monster. As a result, the goblin flew far back. After this, the other girl shot 2 arrows from her bow. Then a tall guy with a bat appeared above the group of goblins. He jumped high into the air and then delivered a crushing blow. When the goblins realized that they couldn't win, they started running away. There were 6 people in total, and 3 more were hiding behind the monster's carcass. Then the archer felt something strange and pulled the bowstring again. However, a package of food appeared near her feet. The girl looked up and saw a man waving at her from his balcony. As it turned out, it was the main character who called these people to him. Meanwhile, Sam was already waiting for him outside the door. He held a large box in his hands, and soon the hero opened it for him. However, Sam was unable to enter due to the protective barrier. The system reported that unqualified people cannot enter the house. However, the man did not understand what this meant. James didn't want to believe that no one could get to him. Perhaps only those who were registered as vassals could enter. Sam handed him a box in which he put everything that could be used as a weapon. James saw that there was a toolbox inside. He then took out 5 bottles of water and 5 packets of ramen from the system. He asked Sam to take it down to the first floor and put it at the entrance. However, Sam thought that it would be too dangerous. But the hero said that goblins are only active during the day, so there was nothing to worry about. Moreover, he had to attract people from outside to his side. When they find out that he has food, they will definitely come to him. James said he had a plan, and asked Sam to just take the things downstairs. Then the man said that in that case, he would do it. When he left, James realized that he had to do something for him too. So he turned to the system and asked to open the task window. If Sam completes them, he will be able to gain experience. He was currently level 9 and would receive good rewards if he advanced. So now all he had to do was carry the box of supplies. After that, Sam found himself near the elevator. Then he walked out of the entrance and found himself on the street. He was afraid, but he knew he just needed to put the box down. Suddenly he saw strange silhouettes very close to him. Sam was immediately afraid that they might be monsters. So he ducked down and decided that he needed to get out of here quickly. However, he tripped and the box fell out of his hands. He looked back in horror and realized that the silhouettes were already nearby. He covered himself with his hands, but at the last moment he froze in surprise. It turned out that they were not monsters, but quite good-natured people. Suddenly the system informed James that someone was trying to log into him again. The hero was surprised, but began to guess who it was. He used the absolute eyes to verify his guess. As it turned out, Sam and those same 6 people from the street were standing behind the door. They came there for food because their supplies were running low. The hero realized that these were the same people he had just seen. Now there was talk of offering them citizenship. However, he now realized that he could not give them citizenship by force, because they were outsiders. In that case, they could simply reject his offer. The hero didn't know what to do, but a sound distracted him from his thoughts. He looked at the intercom screen, which showed Sam. He asked him to wait a little and said that he would open it now. James opened the system and decided to edit Sam's assignment. He added a condition to the task. It said that now he himself had to treat 6 guests. James informed him that he now had a new assignment. He asked to tell the people that they would first be given food, and then they would talk. Sam then turned to the strangers and explained the situation to them. After this, he informed James that these people would go with him. James then asked him to offer each of them citizenship. Access rights to the 30th floor were granted to each of them. A moment later, all 6 of them appeared in his apartment. For this, the main character received bonus experience and money. James was very happy about this, and welcomed the people with open arms. One of them was level 23, the same as the monster he killed. As expected, this guy named Mike was superhuman. His skill was called baseball throwing. James decided that this might be perfect for killing monsters. As for his trust, he could slowly increase this value. He then asked the system to set the experience distribution coefficient to 70%. Now he will give them tasks, and he himself will simply earn money and experience. James also decided to get to know them better a little later. They could be the key to reuniting with his family. Suddenly he saw that the trust between the 2 citizens had grown. After this, Sam led the new arrivals into the room. Hannah met them there and he told her to prepare some food. He understood that everything had to be done from scratch, but he still asked her to do it. Hannah realized that James had some kind of plan, so she agreed. She turned to the people and asked them to wait a little. Then one of the guys, John, asked Sam who this James was. However, the man himself did not know what to answer. He knew nothing about him except that he was his neighbor. However, he considered him to be quite an intriguing person, as he had helped them a lot. Then John realized that this guy was superhuman. Apparently, he had some amazing abilities. John decided he had to impress him. He thought that this man could provide them with electricity, food, and water. In the modern world, this was simply a miracle. Then Sam asked the boys if they wanted to take a shower. When the girls, Sally and Alice, heard this, they were delighted. John realized that with electricity, they could enjoy most of the conveniences. Sam also reported that they even had hot water. They had 2 bathrooms so the girls could wash separately. John then told his friend Chris that James's abilities were more powerful than his own. But Mike said they could just give James a good beating. However, John asked him to do nothing and to remain silent. He said their goal was to get as much food as possible, so he asked his guys to take a good look around the room. He approached a guy named Ben, but he apologized and said he had missed everything. John apologized to him, but Ben replied that he had done nothing wrong. But John regretted inviting them to the housewarming party that day. Ben said that he wanted this himself, that's why he came. Then John said that they would have a bite to eat, and then go straight to his grandmother's. But Ben knew it was probably too late. The chances that she was still alive were too small. But John was not discouraged, and said that they would definitely get to her. At that moment, a strange sound was heard from somewhere behind. The boys saw that the front door was slightly open. John immediately picked up a baseball and prepared for the fight. However, only James appeared on the threshold with bags in his hands. Then all the guys realized that this man could save them from this hell. Soon after, the 6 boys and James sat down at the table. Hannah apologized to them and said it was a little cramped in there. But John replied that they had already dropped in here without warning. Meanwhile, Sam was approaching the table with a tray in his hands. After this, he placed a plate in front of each person. Hannah really hoped that they would like what she had prepared. When Alice saw the dish, she was absolutely delighted. Hannah said it was because of the ingredients James gave her. At this point, Hannah's trust level reached 50, which was higher than Sam's. After this, the boys thanked the woman for the treat. Then they began to taste the dishes with pleasure. At that moment, Sonia approached Hannah. She told her mother that she wanted to try the egg roll too. Hannah promised to cook it after they had dinner with the guests. But Alice called the girl to her and offered her to eat her portion. Sonia agreed and immediately sat on the girl's lap. Then James pointed out that Hannah and Sam should join in too. At first, the couple was a little hesitant, but then they agreed. After that, they all began to eat together. James noted that he hadn't eaten such delicious food for a long time. He thought of his family again and hoped that they were safe now. Then Sonia went to her mother and said that she wanted to sleep. Hannah picked her up and decided to take her daughter to the bedroom. James then suggested that the adults end their conversation. He asked why they couldn't go to their grandmother, who was very close. John replied that it was all because of the goblins. Apparently, the underground parking lot was a place to hide, so the goblins decided to make it their base. They estimated that there were at least a couple thousand goblins there. James understood that his abilities only worked up to the 30th floor. This is why goblins could enter here through the underground levels. John saw that all the entrances to the apartments were connected to the subway, so they did not dare to go out. Their original goal was to use the adjacent road and get out. But there was a monster there that looked much more dangerous than the goblins. John said he looked like a wolf or a bear. They managed to escape from him for only one reason. This monster was fighting a group of goblins at that moment. At this moment, the heroes thought about his words. They didn't know exactly what the beast was because it was very dark there, but James knew they couldn't avoid them forever. However, John understood that they had their limits too. James asked him what he meant. Alice explained that their weapons, arrows and baseballs, might run out. However, James said he could solve the problem. He asked to show him those same arrows and baseball. After that, he placed these items on the list of goods. Then he asked the boys if they knew how to use a bow. This question left the guys stunned. However, James still bought 5 sets of bows and arrows. He said they should have practiced because they would be using them now. At that moment, Ben felt something incredible. He thought that if he and James worked together, they could save his grandmother. The boys were very happy that now everyone had a bow, but James said they needed to reduce the number of goblins first. John asked when they would start hunting them. James confidently stated that they were starting from tomorrow. The sooner they start, the better it will be for everyone. He also stated that they would definitely save Ben's grandmother tomorrow. When the boy heard this, a wide smile appeared on his face, but John didn't see how they could do it. James stated that they would use a bait and switch strategy. Now this idea didn't seem so impossible to the guys. Chris really hoped that this would all work out. James saw that the cost of completing the task was 30,000 won. He realized that he ended up having to spend money on it. It was only possible to raise the level of citizens thanks to money. But now it was not so important, and the hero decided to forget about it for now. After this, he registered Sam as his vassal. Suddenly, the man felt some strange sensation. He saw that something began to sparkle around him. As it turned out, he gained the strength of a gorilla. James could also spend $1,000,001 to level up Sam. But for the hero, this sum was too big. Then he asked Sam how he felt. The man was filled with strength, and he suspected it was thanks to James. It seemed to him that he looked 10 years younger. Then James said that this time he would take part in the operation. He said that citizens would receive a bonus, and Sam would be able to receive twice as much. The hero asked him to make sure to try to kill as many monsters as possible. Finally, he told him that he believed in him very much. After that, the guys headed to the first floor. Even though all the windows were broken, they came there as a rescue team. All survivors in the house had to be sent to the 30th floor. They needed to attract and kill as many goblins in the house as possible. They also needed to find at least one survivor. Then Mike said that he would definitely do it. John said they would start with apartment 101 and asked everyone to be on guard. When they approached the doors, they saw huge traces of blood there. John was horrified when he looked through the door. The rest of the guys covered their faces with their hands from what they saw. There was a whole pile of human corpses inside, and there was blood everywhere. Then John turned around and said that they were leaving here. At the end of the first floor corridor, they saw a huge hole in the glass. John realized that no one on the first floor had a chance, so he decided that he needed to quickly go up to the second floor. However, on the second floor, a pile of corpses was also waiting for them. The boys froze in horror when they saw this horrific picture. John cursed, but asked the boys to go up to the third floor. On the third floor, they no longer encountered mountains of corpses. Then John knocked on the door in the hope that someone would open it for them. But in the end, the guys walked around the entire floor, and no one opened the door for them. John began to lose hope, but still went to the fourth floor. The boys kept knocking on the doors and saying that they were from the rescue team. At some point, one of the doors opened in front of John. An elderly man looked out from there and asked if they were lying. John replied with a smile that they were indeed rescuers. Then the man asked them to give him some water. John obediently handed him one of the bottles he had. He said that they came to rescue those who remained and take them to a safe place. At that moment, the door closed in front of them. Then the man opened it completely, and inside, besides him, were 2 teenagers. The man introduced himself as Hank and explained that he was simply very distrustful. In response, John shook his hand and introduced himself. And then he asked Sally and Alice to take these people to the 30th floor. Hank was very surprised that they didn't go to the first floor. His son came out of the apartment and said that he was very glad that rescuers were finally sent here. Alice also told them that they would be able to eat and take a hot shower. Hank's daughter was delighted when she heard this. After this, the boys asked their dad to get ready and go upstairs. At that moment, Hank realized that he knew these guys. Soon the number of citizens of James reached 40 people. He placed the children and the elderly in Sam's apartment. For now, he left the younger residents in the corridor. John said that in the end they checked 29 floors. However, not all residents were originally in the building. James knew Sam's apartment was almost full, but that would have to be enough. He used his absolute eyes skill. The hero saw that each of the residents was doing something useful. After that, he connected his skill and gave the following instructions. Then they moved on to the second stage, hunting goblins. Soon the boys came out into the corridor, and John asked everyone to concentrate. He said they would hold a briefing now. They needed to lure out the goblins who were hiding underground. First, they started from the -1st floor. They split into 2 teams, cleared out the monsters, and then went to the -2nd floor. Chris was afraid that there would be more goblins than they thought. Then they might just get stuck on the -1st floor, but he was assured that she would be able to deal with them all on her own. Chris wasn't very convinced, but he still agreed. At that moment, the boys heard strange sounds behind them. When they turned around, they saw goblins approaching them. Alice immediately pulled the bowstring and shot at the monsters. With one blow, she was able to eliminate 2 goblins at once. After that, Mike entered the battle with his bat. With one movement, he knocked down the last goblin. Only then did he realize that he should have used a bow. At this moment, Alice noticed something strange. The corpses of the defeated goblins disappeared right before our eyes. Ben realized that it could be James's ability. Then John said that it was now time to go down to the -1st floor. Ben realized that James had a plan all along for what to do with the goblin corpses. James, who was watching the whole thing, noted that it was excellent timing. Although he didn't plan it, he still watched them. As a result, within a few hours, trust in him grew significantly. The hero decided that a large number of vassals would allow him to develop faster. Moreover, one of the citizens had 88 loyalty points. James realized that this would give him time to register. Meanwhile, the boys continued to fight the monsters. At that moment, Ben saw lightning begin to emanate from his body. The goblins who were nearby began to close their eyes. Soon, someone's powerful roar was heard, which drove the monsters crazy. John didn't understand what it was, but he said that they needed to get out of here immediately. The boys obeyed him and immediately headed towards the exit. As they ran, John and Alice shot back at the goblins pursuing them. However, the monsters continued to advance. The guys were terrified because they didn't think they would attract such a crowd. Mike realized that they seemed to have climbed from the -2nd floor. After that, the boys ran to the fire escape. They tried to close the door from the monsters that were chasing them. However, John understood that he could not cope with their onslaught. Then Chris and Mike came to his aid. However, even so, it was difficult for them to hold back the monsters. At that moment, they heard Sam's voice behind them, telling them to disperse. Turning around, they saw that Sam had activated Gorilla Rage. He hit the door with all his might, slamming it shut. He ordered the boys to leave quickly while he held back the onslaught. The man understood that he had to deal with this at any cost. When the boys were safe, they shouted for Sam to run to them. The man immediately tore himself away from the door and ran towards John. However, he tripped on a step and fell to the floor. The goblins were already approaching him and trying to drag him away by the legs. However, Mike came to his aid and fought off the goblins with a bat. After that, he extended his hand to Sam. Time was running out as more and more goblins kept arriving. In just a moment, Sam was already out of Mike's sight. Suddenly, a new crowd of monsters burst out from behind the door and ran towards the boys. One of them jumped at Mike, but didn't have time to touch him. His comrades helped him with bows and arrows. This gave Mike a chance to escape from the monsters. He ran to his friends, who were waiting for him on the stairs. Meanwhile, the same bear was outside the building. He devoured his victim with only one desire to kill. Suddenly, he felt something strange and turned towards the building. Then the bear decided that he would kill them all at any cost. At that moment, Sam was teleported back to the 30th floor. The main character was already waiting for him there. He decided to observe the situation just in case. James thanked himself for having the skill to summon a vassal. And then he noticed that there was a large open wound on Sam's leg. The man said that such a scratch should have healed quickly. But James realized that he should have bought some medicine after all. He walked into the room and asked Sam to wait a bit. While he was looking for medicine, he remembered how his mother treated his wounds as a child. There were only 40 items in his medicine cabinet, and he decided he needed to order more medication. Then suddenly he noticed one useful little thing. It was a first aid kit with used medicines. After this, the hero went out into the corridor with the first aid kit. He asked Sam to show him his wound. He said it needed to be disinfected first. Sam was in a lot of pain, but he endured the pain bravely. After this, his trust in the main character increased. James hoped the rest of the boys were okay too. He then asked Sam to rest a little as he still had things to do. He decided to inspect the underground floors using absolute vision. Meanwhile, the rest of the citizens helped Mike escape from the goblins. At that moment, the monsters practically grabbed him by the clothes. 2 of them tried to jump on Mike from above. At that moment, Ben came to his aid and fought off the monsters. He moved at incredible speed and attacked the monsters with weapons. John and Mike couldn't remember at what point this guy became so strong. James noted that these guys did a great job. He thought it was a good idea to register Ben as a vassal. Meanwhile, Chris reported that he had sorted out the extension cord. Alice also reported that everything was fine with the water tank. After that, Ben ran up the stairs to the guys. He jumped over the obstacles they left for the goblins. After that, they shoved a huge tank of water in there. It burst, and in an instant all the monsters were flooded with water. Then John ordered the rest of the guys to act. Chris pressed the button on the extension cord, and current began to flow through the wires that were lying on the stairs. In an instant, all the goblins were electrocuted to death. For the mass murder, the main character received a large amount of experience. However, suddenly a strong pain pierced his body. A strange sphere began to grow from his body throughout the building. The system detected hostile creatures and immediately began to destroy them. In an instant, the bodies of all the goblins suddenly exploded. The remaining monsters were still running after the boys. Suddenly, one of them noticed a huge figure behind him. Before he could react, the terrifying bear bit his neck. He then began to swing his clawed paws, striking the rest of the goblins. The monsters were terrified and tried to protect their fellows. They attacked the bear from above, but their attack was unsuccessful. Then the goblins attacked him in a crowd and began to sink their teeth into his body. The bear growled in rage as the monsters surrounded him. Then suddenly the goblin heads that were hanging on him exploded. The bear left the battlefield in bewilderment when he received a message that he had received citizenship. At that moment, his body began to deform. Soon the bear's appearance disappeared, and in its place was a young girl. Out of powerlessness, she fell straight to the floor, onto the goblin corpses. At this moment, the main character watched what was happening in horror. He couldn't figure out who this mysterious girl was. Her name was Olivia. She was level 33 and had the ability to become a bear. The hero was surprised that this girl had such a high level and an A-rank ability. Moreover, the trust of the other guys and James reached 50. He then immediately registered Mike as a vassal. Now he could summon steel armor and a halberd. The vassal's level depended on the awakened ability. Sam, with his C-rank ability, was level 20. Mike, with his B-rank ability, was level 25. Ben had an A-rank teleportation ability and was level 30. The level was determined based on ability at the time of registration. James wondered if the rank might have been random. In this case, Sam with a high loyalty score should have received rank B, but it went to Mike, who had a lower loyalty score. James decided to find out how people obtained high-ranking abilities. Then it was more profitable for him to get people of higher rank as vassals. But he didn't know what exactly happened if he accepted a person with ability as a vassal. When he realized that people with abilities could move up and down stairs, he turned his attention to the elevator. James immediately activated the Absolute Eyes skill. After that, he turned to Sam, who was standing behind him. He asked him to bring the woman from the -2nd floor here. Meanwhile, Mike examined the dead monsters. They didn't understand how they died. They were torn apart very suddenly. John realized that this was an ability of an incredible level. At that moment, riddles began to form in his head. He thought of James, whom Sam had called an outstanding man. It was the man who was able to connect the hot water. It was all part of James's ability. He also provided ingredients for Hannah to prepare dinner. John realized that these were clearly his abilities. He also noticed Ben, a withdrawn and quiet guy. However, after meeting James, he became completely different. These changes also frightened John, but he realized one important thing. It didn't matter what abilities James had. To survive in this damned world, there was only one thing to do. It was necessary to make James choose them as vassals. At that moment, Olivia had a dream about herself standing on a playground. She watched her son playing with a toy car. When the boy saw his mother, he immediately began waving his hand at her. But when Olivia looked up at him, her face twisted in horror. She saw that there were 3 goblins standing right behind her son. Before the boy could react, the monsters grabbed him. Olivia witnessed her son being torn apart by monsters. After that, she woke up in a cold sweat. When she opened her eyes, she saw a stranger standing above her. It was the main character who came to visit the girl after that incident. He introduced himself and said his name was James. Olivia asked him if he really did all this. She explained that the goblins' heads were suddenly torn off. James confirmed that it was indeed he who did it. Olivia realized that this guy must have had a very strong ability. Otherwise, he simply wouldn't have been able to rip the heads off of so many monsters. At that moment, she thought that perhaps he could help her. She tearfully asked James to save her son. The girl began to cry and said how much she missed her baby. James knew she had lost her child to the goblins. He really wanted there to be some way out of this situation. He tried to give her a task, the reward for which would be the resurrection of her son. But the system reported that it was impossible to give such a task. James also understood that he was not strong enough to revive a person. However, he then noticed that he simply did not have enough funds for such a task. It turned out that he could resurrect a person if he had money. But for now, it was difficult for him to even imagine how much money would be needed for this. However, he still wanted to help Olivia, so he said that maybe he could save her son. He decided that it would be enough to give her hope for this. The girl asked him if it would really work, but James replied that it was impossible right then. However, there was still a way to do this. Olivia immediately agreed and asked what she needed to do. James knew that if Olivia were added to the squad, it would be much easier for them to deal with the monsters. He thought it would be best to make all 7 boys vassals. So he said he would introduce her to some people first. Olivia soon met John and the rest of the guys. She immediately noticed that this was the guy who used baseballs as weapons. Next to him stood a girl who was an archer. Alice asked the others in surprise how Olivia knew them. She replied that she was in fact an old friend of theirs. But the guys didn't understand why she was behaving so strangely. Instead of answering, Olivia began to transform into a bear. Soon her face was no longer human but a bear's muzzle. In just a couple of seconds, she turned into a huge bear. However, she was much calmer then than she had been that time. She said that she had already helped the boys several times. John realized that their meeting was not accidental. James said he was glad that they already knew each other. After this, he announced that an operation to save Ben's grandmother was to be carried out the next morning. The goblins' numbers were dwindling, and this was their chance. However, Sam had to miss the surgery due to his injury. Therefore, Olivia was supposed to take part in tomorrow's operation. After this, the guys agreed to meet the next morning. Finally, James asked Mike and Ben to come to him. He asked the boys if they knew why he had called them. However, the guys just looked at him in bewilderment. Ben assumed it had something to do with their strength. James confirmed his guess with a smile. He said that this time they both woke up. Ben was given the ability to teleport, and Mike received an ability called Steel Knight. James wanted to know what these guys were capable of before tomorrow's operation. To begin with, he decided to give them a group assignment. If they had failed, they would have had to spend the night in the corridor. Meanwhile, Mike was still surprised that he woke up with Ben. James explained that he could now summon steel armor and a halberd. At that moment, an incomprehensible glow appeared in front of Mike. Then he stamped his feet hard and screamed in surprise. For a moment, she and James looked at each other in silence. Then Ben suddenly rose into the air. He was glad that he was able to activate his ability. After that, he bowed to James and thanked him. But the hero said that he shouldn't have thanked him. Right then, Ben couldn't go to his grandmother yet. There was no guarantee yet that he would be able to cope with his abilities. Maybe he was just lucky then. It was necessary to find out the maximum distance and the penalty for using the ability. Suddenly, the boys noticed a strange glow behind them. When they turned around, they saw Mike in armor with a halberd in his hand. The guy was very surprised at what he got. James then pointed to the house next door and asked Ben if he could teleport there. Ben looked carefully and assessed the distance. He said he would try to do it. While he was getting ready, Mike tried his best to cheer him up. After that, an unusual aura began to swirl around him. In an instant, he found himself in another place. Ben looked out the window and realized that he had been in the opposite building. He realized that he had succeeded and waved his hand happily. But at that moment, he suddenly began to lose consciousness. James and Mike watched in horror as their comrade fell to the floor. The hero immediately activated the vassal summon to bring Ben back. The next moment, his body was right at his feet. They then carried the boy to a hospital bed to recover. James realized that the move required a lot of stamina from him. But once he had rested, he would be fine. He was just not used to the abilities. Then the hero asked Mike if he played sports. He decided to give him the task of push-ups and squats. In the end, Mike completed the task, but was very exhausted. He was a student of the physical education department and had incredible stamina. Then he asked the hero if he could finally finish. James praised him for his excellent work and allowed him to rest. Mike was glad that he had managed to complete the task. As a result, James's strength was also slightly increased. When he looked at his hands, they were enveloped in a dark aura. Now all this changed the situation greatly. The next day, the boys went to the alleys of Busan. They were trying to escape from a whole crowd of monsters. Mike used his ability to help fight them off. With one blow of his halberd, he killed several goblins at once. However, the monsters began to simply run past him. But they didn't have time to run because their heads were shot through. It was Ben who attacked them with arrows. When the other goblins saw this, they immediately turned around and ran away. However, they could not get through there either, as a huge figure loomed over them. It was Olivia, who had taken the form of a bear. Then John commanded the others to take action. While the others fought off the monsters, Ben ran to his grandmother. Meanwhile, James watched their actions from the apartment. This time he was given money for completing the task. This meant that in the future all rewards would be random. But James believed that the rewards would only get better. When everyone had completed their tasks, he decided to open the reward. Suddenly, the system informed the hero that he had won the jackpot. The rewards also included additional skill points. Meanwhile, Ben teleported to the place where his grandmother was. He headed towards their house. When the boy opened the door, he immediately ran to his grandmother. She was still lying on the floor, covered with a blanket. Ben knelt down next to her and tried to bring her to her senses. At that moment, the woman lightly squeezed his hand. When Ben heard his grandmother's voice, he couldn't hold back his tears. He was incredibly glad that she was still alive. He apologized to her for taking so long to get to her. Ben didn't know how to express his gratitude to James for his help. As a result, the loyalty of 3 of the hero's vassals increased. Then James realized that maybe he could level up like that. He decided to see how much it cost to level up Ben. James was horrified when he realized that he would need 100 million won to do this. He mentally apologized to the boys, because now he would have to give them assignments every day. At that moment, he suddenly heard the sound of the elevator arriving. The hero activated his skill to see who it was. As it turned out, there was a young guy and a girl standing behind the door. Hannah also heard the sound and went to the door. She opened it and asked the boys who they were. The girl introduced herself as Catherine and greeted Hannah. Her younger brother Martin stood next to her. They said they lived here, in apartment 1701. After this, Catherine said that they had one request. She explained that she knew how impudent it might sound, but she asked permission to take a shower. At this moment, Hannah froze in bewilderment. She was surprised that this was all they needed. Then she smiled and let the boys in. Martin asked her where he could put the box that was on his shoulder. Catherine said they brought various canned goods. They explained that they could not come to someone else's house with requests and without gifts. Suddenly, Catherine noticed that there was a bat and several bows standing nearby. She asked Hannah if they belonged to the residents of the house. The woman replied that it was a long story. Meanwhile, the hero watched the newly arrived guys. They didn't seem like bad people, so he didn't interfere. He decided that they needed to see each other and have a little chat. In addition, they could have tried to save people from another high-rise building. Suddenly, the system reported that he had caught a red tiger and acquired a new skill. The hero immediately used absolute vision to see what was happening there. By that time, his guys had just finished a fight. In front of them lay the body of the defeated tiger, as well as Olivia, who had lost consciousness. James was in a panic and didn't understand what could have happened there. The system reported that creatures had been discovered that could be granted citizenship. Without thinking twice, the hero decided to give them citizenship. and as a result there were 50 citizens. However, the hero was interested in whether there were any wounded among them. Meanwhile, Ben was carrying his grandmother on his back. Mike carried Olivia on his back, and the rest of the guys just ran after them. This was bad news, as Olivia was seriously injured. Meanwhile, the goblins were getting closer and closer to the boys. However, they managed to fight off the monsters with one blow. Alice even felt that her body suddenly became so light. It turned out that James had increased their abilities. When this happened, their fighting skills also increased. Ben instantly realized that James had a hand in this too. Then the hero decided to register both girls as vassals. Alice and Sally saw a strange aura begin to envelop their bodies. At that moment, several goblins appeared right behind them. Without wasting any time, Alice shot at them with her bow. The arrow suddenly began to behave strangely and moved in a zigzag pattern, attacking every goblin in its path. The girl was extremely surprised that this happened. Then James gave her a task, which involved killing goblins. However, Sally's ability, in his opinion, was quite ambiguous. She could release a mist of deadly poison, but if used incorrectly, it could harm the squad members. However, the hero decided that he would study this later. Now he needed to get to know the people down below. He observed them with his sight. The hero saw a young guy walking with an empty water bottle. Then he started collecting water from the sewer. The hero noted that it was not bad. They had stocked up on water in advance. Since they had supplies, they could avoid joining John's party. At that moment, he suddenly noticed a girl lying strangely. As soon as James saw her, he immediately rushed to the exit. It was Julia, and she had the ability to heal wounds. James realized that this girl was a healer. Soon, he was already standing near the apartment where she was. James carefully opened the door, but it was latched. However, he realized that he had a new skill. With its help, he could summon and control an invisible hand. Then he imagined in his mind how he was breaking this latch. Suddenly, a phantom bolt cutter appeared right in front of him. He aimed it straight at the latch. The next moment, he gained access to the apartment. When James walked in, he saw Julia lying on the floor. The guy tried to bring her to her senses, but the girl did not respond. Judging by her face, she was dehydrated. James thought that perhaps there was something in the apartment that could help her. He saw that same bottle of water, and now he couldn't understand how she could be dehydrated when water was readily available. But in any case, he needed to save Julia. Then he gave her a task in which she had to take one breath. In the end, his plan worked, and the girl began to breathe. She soon opened her eyes, but her vision was still blurry. Julia tried to come to her senses and asked the hero who he was. James said he was her upstairs neighbor. He thought she was in critical condition, so he broke the lock and entered. At that moment, Julia suddenly covered her face with her hands and began to cry. James didn't want to interrupt her, but he said that he needed her help. He explained that the problem was that his friend was very badly injured. Meanwhile, Julia was still trying to understand what he was talking about. This was complete nonsense, since she had no strength to help anyone. Besides, she understood that there was no way he could know that she was a nurse and could treat. But James didn't look dangerous, so she decided to find out more about him first. Suddenly, the hero received a task in which he had to cure Olivia. He asked Julia to eat and rest first, and he would bring the wounded woman here. After that, he left Julia some tangerines. Suddenly, the girl screamed loudly and asked him to stop. She pointed to one of the system windows and asked what it was. But James only said that he would explain everything to her later. She was very weak now, so she needed rest. Julia looked with horror at the tangerines he left for her. After this, the hero returned to his apartment. Julia's trust in him grew, but he still couldn't believe it. It all happened very suddenly. Moreover, his guys should have been here by now. Then he looked down from the balcony and saw something strange. He saw his squad struggling to escape from the tiger. He realized that it was another red tiger. Suddenly, Sally twisted her ankle and fell onto the asphalt. Alice and John immediately turned to help her. However, the tiger was already right behind her and was ready to devour the girl. But suddenly Sally, who had just been in front of him, disappeared. The next moment, she found herself right in the main character's apartment. James realized that she had just been on the verge of death, but thanks to this, he was able to buy time for the others. At that moment, Ben and his grandmother appeared in his apartment. He asked James to take care of her while he was away. However, the hero asked him to wait a little. Ben didn't understand why this was necessary, but he agreed anyway. Then the hero activated the invisible hand skill because he needed to catch this tiger. Meanwhile, John turned around and swung the ball sharply. He threw the baseball towards the monster with all his might. However, the tiger dodged, and this only made him even more angry. Alice was horrified because John was then in danger. He stood right in front of the tiger, which was preparing to kill him. Then John suddenly dashed in the other direction and ordered the others to run. The tiger reacted instantly and immediately rushed after the guy. However, at that moment, a huge pair of tweezers suddenly appeared underneath him. He grabbed the tiger by the neck and pulled it sharply upward. The power of the phantom instrument was so strong that the tiger was lifted off the ground. Alice then turned to the system and was shocked by what she saw. James, however, realized that he didn't have to act on his own. He thought that if Alice went hunting right then, the size of the catch would quadruple. Meanwhile, the girl took aim at the captured tiger. As a result, the monster was defeated, and a huge amount of money was deposited into the hero's account. Moreover, the guy's trust and loyalty towards him increased greatly. Soon after, Julia began treating Olivia. Gradually, the wounds on the girl's body began to heal. James was very lucky to have met Julia. He then asked John how they ended up in this situation. Apparently, the house where Ben's grandmother lived was in Red Tiger territory. James noted that it was strange. There was not a single goblin near the house. Even if they hid from the tigers, Ben's grandmother was in danger. Luckily, the boys only entered the territory of 2 tigers. James noted that they were very lucky. Soon, Julia reported that she had managed to cure Olivia. After that, she asked if she could now go home. Suddenly, Sam intervened in the conversation. He really didn't want such gatherings to continue in his home. But James was going to say that anyway. Apartment 2901 was empty at the time, so he could live there now. He told Catherine that there were 2 empty apartments on the 21st floor. He asked her to tell the survivors that they could shower there. Catherine and her brother agreed to carry out this assignment. James said they could take 1 apartment and leave the rest available for everyone to use, but in return he had one request for them. He hoped that Catherine and Martin would continue to act as messengers between him and the other survivors. He asked me to convey that the first person to kill 100 goblins will receive housing. He promised them unlimited electricity, water, gas, and food. If they have 10 survivors each, they will all get equal treatment. However, the time will depend on the floor they are on. From now on, he intended to pay fairly only those who could prove their worth. Meanwhile, one of the residents tried to escape from the goblins. He hoped that he would be able to run to the exit. At the last moment, he managed to slip through the open door. There were already 3 guys waiting for him with weapons in their hands. They drove away the goblins that followed their partner. Soon after, the goblins turned and began to run away. Then the red-haired guy said that he would show something interesting. He took aim and thrust his spear forward. It pierced one of the goblins straight through. The guy was extremely pleased with what he had achieved. His 2 companions said they killed 22 and 24 goblins respectively. In total, the 3 of them killed more than 100 goblins that day. The guy who escaped from the monsters said there were at least 15 of them. Then the red-haired guy, Simon, asked what he didn't like this time. He added that the quantity didn't matter. The results were good, which meant they would soon have a new home. However, Harry objected and said that he almost died because of him. Simon asked him who came up with the idea of hunting this way. Harry himself told them then that he would be able to escape quickly, but if he was not satisfied with something, he could simply leave the team. However, the twin boys tried to calm them down. One of them turned to Harry and asked him to apologize to Simon. After that, they decided to head to the 21st floor of their new home. But there, Catherine reported that they already had a team that had won a prize. The boys were horrified when they heard this. Simon couldn't believe that there was a team that killed 100 monsters faster than them. He insisted that Catherine give them the new house. Then the girl decided to introduce them to that very team. As it turned out, the team included Martin and an elderly couple. They refused the new house, but in return James promised to provide electricity and water to their apartments. He also freed the couple's daughters from performing tasks. As it turned out, they were both adults, they just had children's faces. They were also promised to give both of them bows and arrows. As it turned out, James himself asked them to kill the goblins in this area. However, Simon was not happy with this situation. He suspected that there were some interested parties. Martin said that James asked to send them to the 30th floor and give them the same prizes. Catherine asked the boys to go up to the 30th floor, where prizes for 2nd and 3rd place were waiting for them. Simon was still angry, but he walked towards the elevator. As they climbed, they wondered who this James was. The twins assumed it was some kind of cult leader. One of them doubted that it was worth talking like that about a man with his abilities on his own territory. They were on their way to meet this man then. At this point, Simon became seriously angry. However, the elevator had already arrived at the 30th floor. There, the main character came out to the guys with a gloomy expression on his face. He smiled and greeted the boys. Simon timidly introduced himself and told him his name. James said he found it interesting to watch their team and how they used the barricades. He also said that he would connect electricity, water, and gas to their apartments right then. He added that they had passed the selection because they had killed 100 goblins. James also noted that he is not a cult leader. Moreover, he didn't want to become a god either. Then he said with a grin that he had one request for them. Soon after, the boys were already running away from a crowd of huge goblins. They turned the corner where reinforcements were already waiting for them. John was already standing there with his weapon at the ready. Having received the command, he prepared to throw a spear at them. His skill was then enhanced by the system. That's why the spear pierced the huge goblin right through. Meanwhile, another monster was already approaching the guy. However, at that moment a huge arrow pierced his head. It was Alice who was behind John. The boy then pulled out another spear and pointed it at the remaining goblin. He ended up killing a level 19 orc, and James received experience for it. After this, John saved several more city residents. Then they all headed towards James's building. This time there were 3 new people. He gave them citizenship, and now there are exactly 200 residents. Now the hero could collect taxes to get back part of the payments. However, he could not get them at his own request. He had to wait 10 months. But he couldn't wait that long to save his parents. James then decided to split the funds and settled on 30%. Suddenly, a strong pain pierced his body again. The dark sphere around the building began to grow again. Now he had the building function available. However, the annual production volume was 30 million won. The solar panels cost $130 million to install, and it would take him 5 years to recoup the cost. That's why he postponed construction. He needed the money then. However, he thought about the fact that he had a grant of 1 billion won. This amount did not include the money in his account, and that changed the whole matter. That's why the hero installed solar panels. Unfortunately, only 1 solar panel could be installed per house. He then turned his attention to new stores. They turned out to be much more interesting than James expected. It was a system that created items in reality as soon as a person paid. All this time, the production of humanitarian aid and its delivery were also work. But with this store, people could buy everything themselves. Moreover, James could install things himself. Therefore, he decided to increase the amount of payments for each resident. He decided to set up shop in room number 101 and then moved on to the gym. There, people could level up and receive rewards for tasks. James then decided to install a gym on the 2nd floor. Moreover, he could now buy goods wholesale and retail. He decided to look at the range of water. To his surprise, there were several brands of drinking water on offer. Moreover, food now had several options too. James decided he would definitely find a use for it. Meanwhile, Mike was fighting the goblins outside. Soon he completed the task, and then John approached him. John asked his partner what would have happened if he had dropped the weapon. He added that he wanted to try something. John picked up Mike's halberd and pulled it back. After that, he threw her forward with all his might. Mike was horrified as his halberd flew off in an unknown direction. However, John asked him to summon the weapon again. At that moment, Mike's hand began to glow with a blue aura. The next moment, the halberd appeared in his hand again. It was incredible, and he even called John a genius. Then Alice said that they had to leave, because she had almost no arrows left. Suddenly she saw that a bag of arrows had appeared right at her feet. Without thinking twice, she used them and fired, killing the orc. For rewards, James could now increase the number of his abilities. It was about 10 kilometers from here to his house, and it took 3 hours to walk there. After that, James went down and headed towards the elevator. He went out onto the roof to get some fresh air. A terrifying picture of a completely destroyed city opened up before him. Then he decided that he urgently needed to hurry. He wondered if he should start with John's team. Then he decided to use the C-rank skill that Chris had. However, he thought it would be better if Olivia and Julia also joined him. Julia was already his vassal, but Olivia did not yet have enough loyalty. People with awakened abilities were initially more effective. Now the hero wondered if there really was no other way. In order to resurrect Olivia's son, he still needed money. So first he decided to raise the difficulty level of the task. The creatures on the 40th floor were stronger, but the rewards for them were also greater. However, the punishment for failure was now death. But still, with his current means, it was impossible. Suddenly the hero noticed a notification that he had been waiting for a long time. It was that same group mission to kill the monster. First, he had to make sure Olivia was on his side. Soon the hero returned home, and then there was a knock on his apartment door. He opened the door abruptly and found Olivia there. She was extremely tired and could barely breathe. She looked up with tears in her eyes and said it happened. James told her that this task was possible to complete despite the time constraints. Unable to contain herself, Olivia fell to her knees and began to thank the hero. She said that one day would be enough for her just to see her son. Now James could also register her as a vassal. Then he noticed the crane that was behind him. A few seconds later, water started pouring out. The hero was glad about this, since he had already become accustomed to the comforts. Now it seemed to him that he was some kind of wizard. He also received a large amount of money from purchases in the store. Then the hero decided to personally monitor how the sales were going. One of the residents was unhappy that the price of onions was too high. In addition to weapons, they needed to buy water and food, but the sellers didn't care. James had no idea that the payments would ruin people's moods so much. After the store opened, pennies for killing goblins became an incentive for further hunting. Now citizens had to go outside their homes to hunt. Their level rose and the number of citizens increased greatly. In the future, the figures were expected to grow exponentially. Meanwhile, Olivia began to carry out the task. She dealt with the goblins quite quickly. After this, she returned to her human form again. Julia was worried about her, but Olivia said she was fine. She explained that she had her own reasons for why she hunted so much. It was the right decision to team up Julia and Olivia. At that moment, the girls heard a terrible roar. They turned around and saw a huge armored orc behind them. Without thinking twice, Olivia began to transform into a bear again. In just a second, she appeared before the enemy in a new guise. However, the orc was determined to fight her back and held his weapon out in front of him. Meanwhile, Alice took aim at him to help her partner. Her charged arrow flew straight at the orc. However, he managed to fight it off with a weapon at the last moment. Then Olivia took advantage of the moment and attacked him from the side. Her power was so strong that she knocked the orc to the ground. Then she grabbed his neck and tore out his throat. The orc leader was killed, and for this James received experience. Also, now he had access to an outpost for 1,300,000,000 won. His guys destroyed all the orcs, and he had enough money in his account. However, if he built it, he would have to leave Julia and John there for a week. The biggest loss was time, which James could not afford to waste. In addition, John's squad destroyed most of the monsters in the area of Jeonpyo Station. Therefore, there was no need to build an outpost yet. And yet the result was not bad. James wanted an outpost to be built near his home. Then he would feel calmer and his family could be safe. He understood that moving his grandparents there would not be easy, so he decided to send John's squad to his house the next day. Meanwhile, Chris witnessed Olivia deal with the orcs. He couldn't understand how a man could tear an orc apart with his bare hands. He knew Olivia was strong even before she received James's blessing. However, he didn't understand how James was able to convince her. It seemed to him that her eyes lit up immediately at the sight of goblins. Chris assumed that she had gained some new abilities. At that moment, the rest of the guys appeared behind him. John said it was time for them to go back. Then Chris called his raven to him. He stroked the bird and smiled warmly at it. Then John asked him to scout out the situation. Chris stroked the raven again and asked him to take care of himself. At that moment, the bird suddenly soared into the air. After a while, she was flying right over the destroyed city. Chris said there were no problems and they could go out. As they walked towards the exit, a rat ran past them. Chris heard her sounds and was surprised that there were rats here at all. He leaned down to the rails to check his guess, but found no one there. Meanwhile, the rat emerged from its hiding place and followed the people. When they arrived home, James decided to ask them for help. At first, the boys looked at their owner in bewilderment. James warned them right away that the chances would be slim. He could not vouch for the fact that his family was in that residential complex. However, Ben confidently told him that they would help. He clarified that they simply have to do this. John confirmed this, saying that they were only able to survive to this day because of James. He added that they would do everything in their power. James thanked them and said that all the orcs in the Jeonpyo Station area had been destroyed, so they could follow the tracks to Seomyeon Station. Then you had to leave the metro through the second exit. He was going to give exact instructions later. For now, James has asked them to aim for the capture of Seomyeon Station. Then he asked the boys to have a good rest and to start the operation the next day. However, Olivia still had questions. She thought that the hero could take the family with his abilities. But the thing was, James had already tried to do that. He had teleportation as a quest reward. Ben's ability interested him at the time, but in the end, everything failed. He assumed that Ben's grandmother was outside the range of his ability. If James's parents had died, there would have been nothing he could have done since they would have been outside the zone. So he said that his abilities were not unlimited. However, he noted that he would keep the promise he made to Olivia. Then the girl thanked him for his honesty. After this, the hero suggested finishing for today and resting. John said goodbye to him, and after that they went to rest. And then the system reported that some creature was trying to enter. The hero used absolute vision and offered the creature citizenship. As it turned out, there was that very mouse near his house. James was extremely surprised that it was not a human. An hour before, the mouse followed John's team. She didn't understand who these people were who were killing orcs. She suggested that perhaps they were all already awake. So she decided to follow them, thinking that it was definitely worth it. She believed in her abilities. But first she decided to observe. At school, she reached a place that used to be a playground. There were children running around and acting as if the end of the world had never happened. The mouse was extremely surprised that there really were children there. Moreover, there were a lot of people in this building. For a long time, the mouse could not understand what kind of place this was. Then she decided that she needed to take a closer look at this building. However, the protective barrier prevented her from entering. But when she was offered citizenship, she agreed without thinking. However, the system window continued to hang over her head. The mouse realized that she couldn't do this in this body. But in the end, she was able to obtain citizenship. When the mouse was inside, people greeted it with cries of fear. They tried to crush her with their feet and she had to dodge. Soon after, the mouse darted into another room. Soon she found herself in the gym. The animal could not understand what was happening here at all. At that moment, The girl who was watching everything through the mouse's eyes felt severe pain. Her head literally began to split. However, she was glad that she had finally found a way to survive. The only problem was how she was going to get there. First, she needed to somehow get to Jompyo Station. The girl decided that she could walk along the subway tracks. However, the problem was the monster that was at Seomyeon Station. But perhaps he would be the one to help her, since there was no place she couldn't get to. The hero soon realized that this mouse was controlled by a man. And since a person with A-rank abilities came to him on his own, he had to accept her. He needed to give her a task, but she was nowhere to be seen. At this moment, the hero remembered the situation that happened the day before. Olivia then asked why he couldn't take the family with his powers. James tried several times, but to no avail. Perhaps the area was not under his influence. It turned out that those who received citizenship were controlled by him. This happened regardless of the distance. He could even see the corpses of the monsters they killed. Therefore, the hero edited the task, setting the punishment for failure, conscription. James didn't even know he could set a penalty for failure. Perhaps he could summon the stranger at least this time, and then there would be a chance to move the family there. It was also said that he would run the outpost as he did this house, so he decided to send John's squad and build an outpost. Then he might have a chance to give his family citizenship. He hoped that he would be able to summon them through the quest. The only question was how much it would cost. Then the hero decided to try to give the task. The price of the task was 30 million, and this calmed James down. At that moment, the same girl with the mice appeared behind him. The hero realized with surprise that he had succeeded. He walked up to her and greeted her by name, which turned out to be Sarah. The hero said that it was he who gave her citizenship. It was the same apartment building that she had seen through the mouse's eyes. He then apologized for scaring her and offered her a cola and a candy bar. At that moment, Sarah began to understand why she was here. James confirmed her guess and said that it was he who gave her that task. Sarah immediately admitted that she understood her impudence, but explained that she had people for whom she was responsible. She asked the hero if he could accept them. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to gather them all here. As it turned out, there were 35 people there in total. James didn't even imagine that there would be other people with her. However, he said that such a proposal would be very difficult to implement. He couldn't bring these people here on his own. One of the girls said that her mother and younger brother were there, and she was ready to do anything. James was able to issue citizenship without personal contact, because the territory recognized the mouse as Sarah. Her trust in him increased, and now all she had to do was trust the hero. Then he asked Sarah if she was really ready for anything. The girl confirmed her words once again. Then the hero said that there was a way, but first she had to trust him completely. He promised to save them all in exchange for her unconditional trust. Sarah said that she would do everything to ensure that he saved her family. Without thinking twice, the hero registered her as a vassal. The girl's body was immediately enveloped in a blue aura, which frightened her. James asked if there were any tame mice in that area. After that, he asked her to send them to their family right away. Using absolute vision, the hero connected to Sarah's vision. Now he could see through the eyes of the mice she had tamed. With this, he saw a small group of people. They realized it was one of Sarah's mice. Suddenly, a window system appeared right above the animal. A second later, food and medicine started falling from there. The boys didn't understand where these things suddenly came from, and assumed that Sarah had brought them here. Sarah's trust in the hero increased, and he was pleased with this. Their abilities combined perfectly with each other. Now he could see through the eyes of 10,000 rats. Thus, the best scouts fell into James's hands. It just so happened that Sarah had been in the area where his home was located. Therefore, she had a greater advantage than John's detachment, which had never been there. Besides, it was enough for her to simply send a mouse there. This made it easier to check on his family and deliver humanitarian aid to them. Then Sarah said that he could rely on her completely. She also agreed to fulfill his request right away. He suggested that it would be better if she moved along the subway tracks. He said he was going to use it to evacuate, but Sarah said he couldn't do that. She reported that there was a monster living at Seomyeon Station. Then James asked to send at least one mouse there. Soon, one of the mice found itself at the right station. She saw a huge snake-like monster holding an orc in its mouth. In one movement, he swallowed the entire body of an orc. Meanwhile, the mouse hid around the corner and trembled with fear. But the monsters found her anyway. The snake opened its mouth, and the mouse simply froze in fear. Without thinking twice, she rushed away from the monster. The main character observed all this with the help of his ability. He guessed that this huge snake was above level 40. Then Sarah said again that he couldn't go through this station. She suggested that they could pass one station and go down to another. His squad will be able to get there without any problems. Realizing that Sarah was right, the protagonist agreed. He then told her that she could go to apartment 2701. She can stay there, but she'll have to clean up. James knew that if he were in her place, he would have planned the same operation. Then he asked the system to install a solar panel. They were quite efficient, but even they were not enough to serve 800 people. As a result, he had to increase the number of employees. He had to create a system with at least 3 shifts. Without thinking twice, the hero announced an increase in the number of security guards. Soon after, John's squad set out on another mission. They were back in the subway fighting other monsters. These were huge bats that attacked them from the air. The boys coordinated their attacks and fired simultaneously. Their arrows pierced the bodies and wings of the bats. In the end, none of the guys were injured. However, Alice doubted that they would be able to kill that snake on their own. But Alice said that in the worst case, James would simply call them back. John also said that they shouldn't worry about it. However, when they arrived at Seomyeon Station, they were horrified. There lay the torn corpses of orcs and an overturned train. The guys decided to go further. They needed to be patient a little. However, suddenly John came across something terrifying. He immediately ordered the rest of the guys to stop. As it turned out, right in front of him was that very huge snake. Mike was terrified and didn't understand how they were supposed to fight such a monster. At that moment, the ground beneath their feet seemed to begin to shake. At John's command, the boys immediately ducked. They didn't understand what happened. It was like an earthquake. Suddenly, John saw a task. They had to kill a huge snake. However, the guy did not understand how to do this. Suddenly, he noticed that the monster seemed to be lying unconscious. At that moment, he didn't understand why James had given them this task. Then he turned to Olivia to agree on a plan with her. After this, he took out his spear and threw it at the snake. The spear hit the monster right in the forehead, and he screamed in pain. Usually, the snake would have problems when it swallowed large food. However, when she swallowed a live mouse, she didn't have to worry. So Sarah's mouse gracefully jumped into the air and flew straight into the snake's mouth. The monster didn't even suspect the consequences of this action. At this moment, the hero opened his inventory. He had several skills he could use. While in the body of a mouse, he summoned gas. At this moment, the snake's belly began to swell sharply. James then summoned burning paper. The snake's belly swelled so much that it was ready to burst. The next moment, a powerful explosion resounded in her body. At that moment, Sarah felt a strong pain in her body. But she said that everything was fine and that she was just scared. Then James praised her for her excellent work. He understood that the snake should not have become his prey. She was supposed to be killed by his vassals. This way he will get 6 times more money and experience. That's why he gave them the task of killing this snake. But he made their task much easier. Meanwhile, Olivia was already transforming into a bear. She jumped up and delivered a crushing blow to the snake right in the neck. Then she flew through the hole in her head that she had made herself. At that moment, the system reported that the huge snake had been killed. The skill level was increased, and the hero felt severe pain again. The spheres surrounding the building began to pulse again. He then issued citizenship to 200 people at once. The system reported that the experience and money that citizens received increased by 100%. After that, he began distributing payments to citizens. However, his attention was suddenly distracted by Sarah. She asked him if he could move her people here. James grinned and said that of course he would do it. When Sarah heard this, she was overjoyed. Then James asked if she could control the mouse again. He ordered her people to follow the mouse, and she would lead them. After that, they began to carry out the plan. One of the mice, meanwhile, was trying to lead John's squad out. Soon they came to the place where Olivia was. However, she stated that everything was like this before she arrived. John understood that this was previously orc territory. However, now only their torn corpses lay here. And even though they defeated the boss, they couldn't relax. After that, the mouse showed them the right way. Ben assumed that this was also one of James's abilities. Meanwhile, the main characters watched the detachment from their home. There shouldn't have been any more danger for these guys. He also had 3 unused experience points left. The first thing the hero decided to do was upgrade his absolute eyes, as they went well with Sarah. When he did this, he felt a severe pain in his head, and then the hero saw that the names and levels of the monsters began to appear above them. James was pleased, as this ability came in handy for him. First, he needed to find a monster of the same level, and give people a task to save up money for resurrection. He then turned to the status preservation skill. The trust and loyalty of the people he would meet were also important, so he decided to level up this skill. However, suddenly the hero heard something strange. It was the sound of gunshots. As it turned out, his squad came across goblins with pistols. However, the hero did not understand where they got the weapons from. The guys had no choice but to escape from there. John knew that if they attacked directly, they wouldn't stand a chance. However, they had Ben, who was already attacking them from behind. He stabbed one of the goblins in the back, causing him to drop his pistol. After that, he launched a circular attack at the remaining monsters. His partners helped knock the gun out of the goblin's hands. Mike and Olivia rushed into battle, and Alice covered them with arrows. At this point, Chris and Sally were horrified by what was happening. In the end, the goblins suffered a crushing defeat. Meanwhile, James registered the pistols as goods. However, he could not sell such things in the store. If the guys have weapons, they will kill monsters faster. Normal people below level 10 will be able to hunt. Experience and money will also increase exponentially. However, there were also downsides, as it was difficult to trust everyone. Now James was giving citizenship to everyone. He had no criteria. He accepted everyone without checking, confident that he could control them. Of course, with the increase in the number of citizens, many advantages have come. But with the advent of weapons, everything became different. There was no guarantee that there were no people with problems among them. Therefore, weapons could only be distributed to those who passed a strict check. These were people with high loyalty, and James already knew who would get it first. Meanwhile, John's squad dealt with all the monsters. Suddenly, a box with a gun appeared right in front of Ben. He realized it was a gift from James, and mentally thanked him. Soon after, the mouse led the rest of the children to the exit. After a while, they found themselves near the doors. When they opened them, they saw a crowd of frightened people there. After this, the hero went out to meet new people. He took Sarah with him, who was extremely grateful to him. Then James said that her people had already arrived. When he gave them citizenship, Sarah heard a familiar voice. She looked up and saw her mother and sister. She immediately ran up to them and hugged her family tightly. Her sister immediately sensed that Sarah had managed to take a shower. Meanwhile, the heroes watched the family reunion with smiles. After that, he told Sarah that apartment 2071 was assigned to her. However, for 30 people it will still be a bit cramped. Then Sarah looked at her family and the people standing behind her. James said he gave them 3 more apartments because she deserved it. The girl thanked him and said that she would work as hard as she could. James's confidence had grown, but something had piqued his interest. Apparently, he simply increased the level and did not check the result. Suddenly he saw a column called Fundraising Management. When he saw the price of 1 billion won, he was horrified. Suddenly Sally turned to him and said that she wanted to talk. They went to James's room to talk alone. The girl was very nervous and could not start a conversation. Then James said that she could speak to him freely. Then Sally apologized and said that she wanted to leave the squad. The main character was very surprised by this decision on her part. Sally stated that her abilities were useless in the squad. However, the main character asked her to be honest with him. Then Sally suddenly cried out that she was very scared. She was very afraid of monsters, that huge snake and the red tiger. She apologized to the hero again, because he always saved them. However, she felt that she could not live up to his expectations. James had long seen the signs of this. He watched Sally's reaction as they rescued Ben's grandmother and hunted orcs. She also almost died when a red tiger chased her. James realized that her contribution to the squad was small. However, he couldn't blame her for this, because her ability was unusual. If used carelessly, it could cause harm to squad members. Even though Sally risked her life, she was clearly disappointed with the results. Meanwhile, the girl was still standing in front of him and continued to cry. Then the hero said that he just needed help. He asked Sally if she knew Catherine from the 21st floor. She tried to cope on her own, but she had a hard time. So now he needed someone he could also entrust with the construction. He asked Sally if she could help him. The most important thing is to find the right job for the person. In that case, it will never be useless. Moreover, Sally's ability was very strong and would definitely be useful to them. If Sally is having a hard time working outside now, she can work inside. But one day, he may ask her to use her ability again. Sally was very touched by these words and smiled warmly. The girl's loyalty increased, and she apologized for her behavior. She apologized for showing James her weakness. After that, she promised that she would try her best in the future. The hero thought that perhaps he should have summoned the mythical creature for 1 billion won. Without thinking twice, he decided to do it. Suddenly, a bright flash of light appeared in front of him. An incredibly bright portal opened under James's feet. The light was so strong that he had to cover his face with his hands. Soon a golden egg appeared in front of him. Literally a second later it began to crack. However, what hatched from there amazed the main character. As it turned out, it was a small black bird. James immediately used the Absolute Eyes skill on her. It turned out that it was a 3-legged crow, and in order to grow, it needed to absorb solar energy. After this, the creature greeted the hero with a joyful sound. James wondered what he should name the raven. Since he was a black raven, James decided to name him Blackie. Judging by the raven's reaction, he liked the new name. Suddenly, he started shouting something, as if asking for something. James guessed that perhaps the raven was asking for food. Then he got out a pack of cookies for him, and the raven ate it with pleasure. However, after eating, he immediately fell asleep. James was surprised at how carefree this creature was. At the same time, the raven's level was increased, and James was given the ability to install solar panels. He didn't want to invest such a sum in something that could only bring him losses. But that was another story. However, the efficiency of solar panels and the income from them have tripled. Therefore, the hero installed them in all 10 districts without hesitation. Soon after, he headed to Sam's apartment. When the man opened the door, He said that he had a favor to ask of him. He asked Sam to take his money into his custody. After that, James told him one important thing. Sam was shocked when he heard her. James decided that if he handed over the money to trusted citizens for safekeeping, it could bring benefits. Then he could earn 10% profit every month. In the end, he could only trust Sam with the money, whose level of trust was incredibly high. Hearing this, the son became excited, but agreed. James also said that he might spend some of the money. Sam began to bow to the hero, but he said that there was no need to thank him. After this, James went to Catherine to tell her that she had a partner. He stated that now Catherine and Sally will work as a team. Moreover, as the team leader, he doubled her salary. Hearing this, Catherine promised to do her job well. Then she grabbed Sally's hand and pulled her into the room. The main character was glad that everything turned out this way. However, now it's time for a serious conversation. He walked over to John's squad and said they had done a great job. Then the guys asked why he had come to see them. James explained that there are no monsters in the subway now. Now was their chance, while there were still places available. The hero realized something while talking to Sally. These people risked their lives to carry out missions. They were also lucky to know about the monster in advance thanks to Sarah. In a world where sudden death was commonplace, wanting to save one's family seemed selfish. Still, he couldn't give up, so he sent the boys to another station. Soon after, Chernish's level was also raised. Now the creature was already at the 5th level. Moreover, he developed magical skills. James didn't understand how to summon them, but suddenly a light appeared on the tip of his index finger. James realized that this feeling was very familiar. It was like using the status preservation skill. Soon after, James went to a deserted place. There he concentrated a flame the size of a house, capable of burning everything around. After that, he extended his hand to control it. But when I opened my eyes, I saw only a small ball of flame. This was not at all what he expected. It seemed that was all he could do for now. The ability didn't turn out to be so incredible. However, when combined with the gas summoning skill, it became mega dangerous. The level was modest, but had potential for development. James then decided that the test could be stopped at this point. At the back, Chernish has grown by 3 levels, and the efficiency of solar panels has increased 8-fold. As a result, the remaining energy could be converted into money. Suddenly the hero heard the doorbell ring. It was Sarah. She thanked him for giving her time to rest. The hero replied that he simply gave her a well-deserved reward for her abilities. However, today he also hoped for her help. Sarah reported that she had already sent mice to accompany John's squad. However, problems arose at the Korean station. To be more precise, it happened at Busan Station. Sarah invited James to see it for himself. He saw debris and electrified water. The hero realized that it was impossible to pass by. Sarah said she tried sending the mice to the surface. However, on the surface there were also only ruins. There wasn't a single intact building there. Everything was destroyed. Suddenly they saw a huge footprint. Now James understood why the buildings had not survived. This explained why all the roads were destroyed. Suddenly the heroes felt that an earthquake was starting. At that moment, James was very afraid for his life. If this continues, the building will simply collapse. A frightened Sarah asked him what it was. James had an idea of the reason for this strange vibration. Suddenly Sam called them and said that they should take a look at it. Then James suggested that Sarah go outside first. Sam was scared and asked the hero to come to him first. The thing is, Sam's apartment windows overlooked Seomyeon Station. Moreover, the man urgently called him after the rumble. At that moment, James had a very bad feeling. When he looked out the window, at first he couldn't believe his eyes. He saw a giant monster the size of several buildings. With blows of his paws, he easily crushed houses. The hero immediately used the summoning of vassals. A moment later, John's squad appeared behind him. The boys didn't understand why they suddenly found themselves in the apartment. However, when they saw the monster through the window, horror was reflected on their faces. A giant one-eyed monster was looking straight at them. After that, he crushed another building with his fist. The boys realized that the monster was now heading towards them. James was clear that they had to be stopped. However, he doubted that he could cope with the attacks of this monster. When he was almost in despair, Olivia turned to him. She looked forward firmly and asked to be given a chance. Then she was filled with rage towards this giant. James asked her if she could really handle him. In response, Olivia said that she would do everything to cope. James then decided to give them brief instructions for the operation. Soon after, the boys said they understood the plan. To begin with, they were divided into 3 teams. The first 2 teams were to head to the scene of the operation. The boys immediately obeyed and ran outside. Sally sent some to the main gate and escorted the rest to the underground parking lot. Then the hero said that she herself should also go to the parking lot, but the girl said that she also wanted to help in the operation. Noticing her shaking, the hero doubted that she would cope. But even though Sally was scared, she decided that she would pluck up her courage. So, together with James, they went to the main gate. It turned out that 101 people were already waiting for them there. Of the 1,200 people, only 100 served in the army, and that was not enough. Then one of the people asked what they needed to do. The hero asked him where the twins from his team were. Without waiting for an answer, he realized that they had escaped. Hundreds of people, including Simon and the twins, played dumb and simply took refuge in the parking lot. However, those who were there understood that if they did not fight back, they would die. They came here to protect themselves and their families. However, courage did not mean fearlessness. It meant not giving in to fear and taking action. So the hero thanked everyone for coming here. He then purchased 101 pistols and ammunition. As a result, each of those who came received a weapon, as well as bonuses to speed, money, and experience. He asked every resident to take a weapon and ammunition. In the end, those who decided to look fear in the face received a reward. At that moment, everyone suddenly heard a terrible roar behind them. The hero activated the absolute eyes and realized that the battle was beginning. Meanwhile, the monster was already furious. John was not far from him, hiding around the corner. At the right moment, he threw a spear straight at his leg. The monster immediately noticed the attacker and leaned towards him. Then he growled and swung his giant hand at him. But at that moment, Olivia was already running towards him from behind. She stabbed him in the leg with her bare paw. The monster reacted instantly and kicked the ground. The blow sent Olivia flying against the opposite wall. The monster leaned towards her and looked at her menacingly. Then he was about to finish her off, but suddenly something distracted him. It was Mike who was speaking to the monster through a megaphone. Then the monster noticed that the spear was still sticking out of his leg. Mike didn't understand why the monster had such a strange expression on his face. After that, the monster looked straight at him. Without thinking twice, it rushed straight at Mike, and he was forced to run. Then the hero realized that the monster was already here. He addressed the residents and asked them to prepare. He said that this creature would be here soon. Mike soon broke through the protective barrier, bringing the monster with him. Then Chernish attacked him from above and pecked him right in the eye. Meanwhile, Alice was already preparing to shoot her bow. The arrow pierced the palm and hit the monster right in the eye. Then it was Ben's turn to float in the air with Sarah's mice. When the monster opened its mouth, the mice immediately jumped in. So far, everything has gone according to plan, and the hero has made a call to Gaz. The monster felt something strange filling him from within. At that moment, James decided that he would put an end to this now. He summoned the initial magic of the fire element, and immediately flames gushed out of the monster's throat. Then he walked slowly towards the protective barrier. The citizens were very scared because the monster was walking straight towards them. But James asked everyone to stay where they were. Everything went according to plan almost perfectly. Now all the citizens' shots had to be concentrated on the monster's head. Then, according to the plan, the vassals were supposed to finish him off. Suddenly Sam screamed in panic and asked the hero to turn around. But James reassured him, saying that the monster would not be able to break through the barrier. However, when he turned around, he saw the monster's eye right in front of him. James froze in horror and couldn't believe his eyes. Apparently the monster was able to withstand this attack. After that, he delivered a crushing blow straight at the barrier. James realized that he needed to stop the barrier from blocking him. He ordered the citizens to open fire on the monster. All 100 people started shooting him straight in the head. There were many shots, and the monster was forced to cover his face. Even though they blocked it, they won't be able to withstand repeated attacks. All it would take is one breach for them to all perish. Then the hero decided to call upon the invisible hand and gigantification. It was a skill he unlocked with saved skill points. In this way, he prepared himself for the best possible outcome. Meanwhile, the monster raised its paw for another attack. But his blow did not cause any damage to the barrier. The residents were very happy that the barrier withstood the giant's blows. They then continued shooting at him with pistols. The bullets seemed to do no harm to the monster at all. Now there was a combination of car bombs and civilian attacks. These attacks would gradually inflict damage and would eventually kill the monster. However, they needed something that could deal a critical blow. At that moment, another spear flew into the monster's back. James was very glad that John's squad had finally arrived here. Soon he saw John himself in front of him, as well as Olivia and Julia. The hero summoned the standard claws and hoped that they would work. John immediately took advantage of them and launched them at the monster. After that, Alice attacked him from above with arrows. Thus the boys continued their joint attack. By that time, the level of Chernish and the generators had increased. Now the heroes have requested permission to release the power. They became curious about what this little guy could do with the monster. They allowed it to be done, but in the end 300 million won were spent. Suddenly the heroes saw that rays began to emanate from the building. As it turned out, they were coming from his apartment. Suddenly, a huge raven appeared in front of him. It was Chernish's new form. He then fired a bright beam straight at the Cyclops. It was so powerful that the hero and the citizens had to duck. From such a strong blow, the monster fell to the ground. He began to scream loudly from incredible pain. Olivia took advantage of the moment and jumped straight at him. She attacked him from above, and eventually the monster was defeated. As a result, James's skill level increased by several levels at once. However, then the barrier around the house began to crack again. The hero fell to his knees in pain, and Chernish landed next to him. James was unhappy that he just went and spent 300 million, but in the end, it was Chernish who dealt the critical blow. So the hero praised him for his excellent work and patted him on the head. As a result, the hero got back 30 million out of the 300 million spent. He thought about summoning 10 guardians at once, as that would be incredibly powerful. However, the recruitment fee suddenly rose to 10 billion won. But suddenly another notification caught James's attention. As it turned out, Olivia completed the task to connect with her son. Her wish was finally fulfilled, and she couldn't contain her emotions. Meanwhile, in another place, a man was distributing water to residents. He used his abilities to get his comrades drunk. However, he realized that they were still running out of food. He could make water, but the food he had obtained in battles was running out. The man understood that in the end, they would still have to leave here. But at that moment, the ground beneath their feet began to shake violently. The boys realized that apparently, an earthquake had occurred. One of the guys called the man Henry to run away from here. He told him that the monster was coming straight towards them. Without thinking twice, Henry immediately ran to the roof to see what was happening. He saw in horror that right in front of them was a huge cyclops. Then he asked Oliver to lock everyone in the basement. They themselves had to somehow fight against this giant, but the men understood that they could do nothing against him. But before they could finish speaking, the monster suddenly exploded. Henry and Oliver looked in horror at the place where the Cyclops had just been. Henry immediately realized that this was the work of an awakened one who was much stronger than himself. So he ordered Oliver to gather the men immediately. He was sure that this was their only chance to survive in this world. They had to hold on to this man. Soon after, Henry and his men headed to the scene. Soon they reached a place where houses still stood. The whole city turned into hell, but some buildings were unharmed. However, Oliver suddenly hit an invisible protective barrier. The system informed the boys that they were not allowed in. After that, the system offered them citizenship, and they agreed. Soon the hero was already receiving them at his home. He introduced himself as James and greeted the new arrivals. Then Henry realized that this was the same man. It was he who had killed that giant, and now Henry stood right in front of him. After this, Henry bowed to him and squeezed his hand tightly. He begged the protagonist to take care of him. Meanwhile, Olivia enjoyed the results of the completed task. She sat with her son David, and they ate food together. The boy even thought that today was someone's birthday. The thing was that his favorite dishes were on the table. At that moment, the main character entered their apartment. He reported that the newcomers were fine and had received shelter and food. However, James then said that he was very sorry. He didn't expect that Olivia and David wouldn't be able to leave the house. But for Olivia, just being with her son was enough. Now she was truly happy with what she had. Olivia's loyalty to the hero grew, and it was clear right away. To do this, he just had to look at her face and behavior. David then invited his mother to play his favorite game with him. He was very fond of video games that had mechanical dinosaurs. The main character watched what was happening with a smile. Then he thought about how his family was doing now. He hoped nothing bad happened to them. However, he decided not to rush because it was only one day. James knew how much work Olivia had put into this day. Meanwhile, Sarah's mice were heading towards his home. After that, they were able to deliver everything his family needed. So today he decided he would just hang out here. He wanted to see Olivia's one dream shine. After that, he said that he and David could sleep in the master bedroom. Although Olivia wanted to refuse, the hero insisted on it. He said with a warm smile that it was an order. In response, Olivia and David bowed and thanked him for his concern. Finally, David wished his wizard uncle good night. The hero saw off the mother and child with a warm smile. At night he heard Olivia singing a lullaby to her son. That night her voice could be heard through the narrow crack in the door. The hero was too old for lullabies. However, his eyes also began to close as he listened to her. The next day everything went smoothly. The three of them had lunch. Then they watched David's favorite cartoons together. David chased Chernish hard and he got angry. After that, they dozed off together and played with toys. As a result, time flew by completely unnoticed. James was very sad that David only came for one day. He could only give them such a short time. So now David wondered why his mother was crying. Olivia tried to hide her tears, but she couldn't. Then David asked her not to cry and wiped away her tears. Olivia admitted that she is afraid to live in a world where he does not exist. In response, David hugged her tightly around the neck and said that he would always be with her. His voice was incredibly warm and he tried to calm Olivia down. But in reality, he only broke her heart. After this, the boy walked away from her and said that he would always be there. Olivia was crying and didn't want to let go of her son. She begged him to stop, because there was so much she hadn't done for him yet. But when the boy turned around, his body began to gradually disappear. Finally, he told his mother that he loved her very much. As a result, another inevitable farewell came for the girl. She bit her lip, but knew there was nothing she could do. She smiled through her tears and told David that she loved him too. After this, the boy's body finally dissolved into thin air. Olivia remained in the room until the last trace of David disappeared. The hero thought that hope was a flower that grew only in the depths of despair. Those who kept hope within themselves were probably constantly drowning in doom. James noted that it was incredibly cruel, but he still told Olivia that this was not their last meeting. He decided that he should breathe hope into her again. These words really managed to calm the girl down a little. James promised that if he had a chance, he would definitely do it. Thus, he instilled this devilish temptation into Olivia. Meanwhile, Simon was furious. He told the twins that his spear was all he had. However, now everything is lost, since his spear was stolen. One of the twins also said that when he woke up, his things were gone. As it turned out, the same thing happened to other people. All these people did not go to defend the main gate. Moreover, everyone who went there returned safe and sound. The twins were wondering if they should have gone with everyone else. Simon got angry because he thought they were implying that he was to blame. They agreed to this plan themselves. No one forced them. The twins were scared by his reaction and tried to calm him down. Simon eventually let one of them go. He began to fear that they might be expelled from the community, as this had happened before. The man who molested the child was immediately driven out and was soon found dead outside. They said that if Simon spoke out against James, he could be expelled too. Moreover, Harry answered the call, and now he even had a weapon. James, who was watching him, noted that everything Simon had gone through was just the beginning. Once he gets punished, the other survivors will treat him differently. Now he gave him a punishment task, for which there was 1 minute of terrible pain. Simon had to learn to take responsibility for his actions, and not cross the line again. The hero then thought about the skill that Olivia possessed. He received this skill as a reward for reaching 100 points. But now he had no need for it, since James was not taking part in the battles. He is unlikely to be injured since he did not leave the house. But he was pleased by the fact that he still received such a skill for trust. Soon he will also be able to obtain Ben's awakened ability. Using teleportation, he will be able to move to any place within his field of vision. Then he can use the absolute eyes on the watchtower. Theoretically, with sufficient intelligence, he could move to this location. Therefore, now the reward will be an increase in intelligence. At that moment, Olivia asked him for permission to act. She firmly stated that she would personally save his family. The operation was supposed to be yesterday, but it was postponed for a day because of her. Olivia also thanked him for sacrificing his time for her. Now she wanted to repay his kindness. The girl was saying exactly what James was thinking. He was grateful to her, but still he felt a little ashamed of his impatience. However, Olivia said that she would have done exactly the same thing in his place. For any person, their own family was the most important thing. The hero realized that she was influenced by the meeting with her son. There was no longer any malice in her eyes now. There was trust there. So the hero thanked her for her understanding. He asked Olivia to wait for him in the apartment. The hero had a reason why he didn't send them to Seomyeon Station immediately after assembling the squad. The giant damaged part of the subway, including underground spaces in the Seomyeon district. So now it was necessary to dig a new path. Sarah has been trying to find a reliable route since yesterday. Then the hero decided to use the absolute eyes. He noticed the condition of the rats. Sarah now had a tamed level 7 giant rat. The hero realized that she had evolved. However, he wondered who exactly was chasing this rat. As it turned out, a crowd of zombies was following her. James was extremely surprised that there were even zombies there now. At some point, the rat found itself in a trap. Then the hero realized that he should stop senselessly killing rats. Instead, he decided to use a gas explosion to destroy the zombies. At that moment, the rat picked up speed and ran forward past the zombie. They tried to catch her, but she skillfully maneuvered between them. James noted that this tiny was quite tenacious. The exit from the station was already waiting for her ahead. However, the rat did not notice that there was a huge shark nearby. Both the rat and James were horrified when they saw her. The level 23 land shark opened its mouth to devour the mouse. When the mouse died, the hero was suddenly thrown out of absolute sight. He didn't understand where the land shark came from. But what was more important was Nampo Station, which was not far from his parents' house. There were chances that such monsters were roaming around their house. So James decided he needed to hurry. Meanwhile, Catherine was doing her part. James walked up to her and praised her for a job well done. For Catherine, it was easy and paid well. However, James had one more request for her. Catherine didn't understand why he was acting so nervous. She was guessing what he wanted to ask her. Then the hero asked to give him Sally for a while. Catherine was terrified that she would have to work alone again. James said with a smile that he would rely on her. But the girl was wondering if he would pay her for the overtime work. James smiled and said that he would give her double her salary. Catherine was more than pleased with this answer. Then thick green smoke began to pour out of the system. As it turned out, it was Sally's skill. Soon after, the entire team gathered in one place. James began the formal strategy meeting. The giant's appearance made passage through Seomyeon Station impossible, but it was a shame to just give up the metro. Sarah said there was a route from another station that was free of monsters, so their goal now was to clear this path. The boys looked at the plan that James had drawn for them. Mike noted that James draws very beautifully. James became embarrassed, cleared his throat, and decided to continue his explanation. He showed a place to be wary of. Orcs settled in the supermarket. There were at least 500 of them there. Then John asked if it was necessary to fight them. Sarah added that their goal is to get to the station and use the metro line. The rats confirmed that there are no orcs there. You just need to deal with the monsters along the way. The hero realized that he had spent a lot of money to raise the level of his squad members. Now everyone was on level 30, except for Sam and Sally. But the goblins no longer posed a threat to John's squad. Then he said that the problems would start at Busan Station. But the giant was not yet visible there. The problem was in a tunnel on the section of track between two stations. The passage between the stations was filled to the brim with zombies. If they can destroy the monsters in a confined space, it will be dangerous. At this point, Sally began to panic again. However, she then said that her ability could be useful. Soon after, she transferred the poisonous fog into the vault. James praised her for her excellent work. Then he asked her how she felt. The girl said that at first it was very difficult, but suddenly she felt a surge of strength. The thing was, Sally looked exhausted, so he raised her level. It cost a lot, but such expenses were nothing to him. Now she needed to stay here and continue creating the poisonous fog. After this, James reported that the preparations were complete. Everything was ready to begin the operation. Meanwhile, the zombies were still walking along the underground paths. Suddenly they saw a mouse approaching them. The third-level mouse ran straight towards them at full speed. At this moment, the hero opened the warehouse. Sally's poisonous mist poured into the crowd of monsters. Its poison caused paralysis. After inhalation, it restricted movement and prevented one from standing on one's feet. The poison then paralyzed the diaphragm and intercostal muscles, suffocating them. However, these were zombies. They were already dead. They did not need to breathe. It was in cases like these that James had a plan B. At that moment, a crowd of mice rushed out of the darkness towards the zombies. The last thing they saw was the open mouths of mice. Suddenly, James noticed that Sarah began to tremble. She said there was something wrong with the mice. As it turned out, after being bitten by a zombie, the mice also became zombies. James realized that this was almost going to end in disaster for them. Olivia, who also bit and clawed, could have become infected. However, the mutated rats still obeyed Sarah's commands. However, they looked angrier than before. But that was good. Now everything was going according to plan. And suddenly the hero noticed that someone was trying to get inside. There were 157 people, and he offered them all citizenship. The number of citizens in his settlement had now reached 3,000, and he had gained a new skill. Now he has decided to issue the title to Catherine and the team for public needs. His plans coincided perfectly with the pay for the employees. Now he didn't have to pay money, losing part of it due to commission. All the money in the Economic Support Fund was essentially free. As a result, he could earn almost 30 million won a day. Assigning titles to citizens was the most beneficial solution. Therefore, the hero wondered what other works would be appropriate. So far, he has offered maintenance, cleaning, and security. The guard was to consist of those who gathered at the main gate. Moreover, Catherine was given the title of general manager. Then he wondered what to do with Sam and Sally. Suddenly he saw a message that Catherine's loyalty had reached 100. As expected, achieving such loyalty immediately made her a vassal. Now James was curious about what her ability was. Then he turned his attention to the sleeping Sally. Sarah really wanted to wake her up, but James asked her not to do it. The thing was that Sally had already completed the mission assigned to her. She worked until she was exhausted and now deserved a rest. The hero guarded her with an invisible hand and asked no one to disturb her. Sarah then noted that it must have been hard for her, but now the hero was worried about Sarah's condition. The girl replied that everything was fine, and they were now on the tracks of Nampo Station. However, suddenly she saw something strange. Concerned, James asked what happened. Then the girl said that she had lost contact with the rats. She asked to give her a second to figure everything out. She quickly realized that the distance was too great. James noted that her ability had worked fine before. Sarah said it was okay to move away if the connection was already established, but the communication coverage area only reached the central station. The hero did not understand why it all started exactly then. His family was just nearby and he was going to use mice to check his house. So he approached Sarah with a rather difficult request. He asked to establish contact with the central station by any means. Without thinking twice, the girl began to carry out the order. Soon after, she was able to observe zombie mice. The hero understood that they had to exhaust all options before something happened. He really hoped that everyone would be safe in the end. Meanwhile, John's squad left the subway. When the boys came outside, they were very surprised by what they saw. Before them was a completely destroyed city. At that moment, the guys didn't know what to feel. Then Chris ordered the Raven to go on reconnaissance. There were no monsters in sight anywhere nearby. Thanks to the giant, they could now pass without problems. Chris hoped that no one would come near these ruins. However, it was already getting dark, so Julia suggested stopping in a safe place and leaving in the morning. But Alice said that goblins were less active at night, and it was even safer now than in the morning. Then John decided that they would move out immediately. If the situation gets dangerous, James will simply call them. Suddenly, one of Sarah's mice came up to them, and the boys decided to follow her. Soon they found themselves near Busan Station, which now looked like a lake. Chris assumed it was the work of a giant. Alice assumed that when the building collapsed, this gap was formed. As they walked, they did not notice that a strange woman emerged from the water. However, Chris still noticed a strange sound somewhere to the side. He saw that there was someone on the island. It was a woman, but she looked very strange. The boys noted that she had a tail like a mermaid. Suddenly she started screaming, and the sound was simply unbearable. The boys were forced to cover their ears so as not to hear him. As it turned out, this woman was a siren. This cry forced the boys to move against their will. Suddenly, Mike and Olivia fell into the water without meaning to. Because they could not move, they began to drown. Olivia knew that Mike would simply die. She tried to save him, but someone's hands grabbed her from the depths. The girl tried to swim out, but the monsters had already grabbed her by the body. As it turned out, other sirens were already waiting for them in the depths. Meanwhile, John and Julia were trying to cope with the screaming. Choosing the right moment, Julia activated magical protection. Suddenly, the boys felt that they immediately felt better. However, Julia's strength was running out, and they urgently needed to rescue the drowning people. But when she looked up, she saw something terrible. Huge monsters were approaching them straight from the water. As it turned out, there were already guards with spears in their hands around the siren. When they saw people, they immediately dived into the water and swam towards them. Then John ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Flora monsters jumped out of the water and attacked the boys from above. But John was ready and repelled their attack. However, the monsters kept coming in larger numbers. Alice understood that she didn't have time to shoot everyone. Soon after, the boys were completely surrounded. John realized that they didn't have time to fight them. First of all, they needed to save Mike and Olivia. However, suddenly a strange explosion was heard in the water. After this, Olivia jumped to the surface in the form of a bear, holding Mike in her arms. The guy came to his senses pretty quickly and started spitting out water. The guys were very happy that their partners came out. Olivia said she repaid Mike for how often he saved her. However, the monsters did not calm down and continued to attack the boys. They surrounded them again, giving them no chance to rest. Without wasting any time, Mike donned his armor and summoned his halberd. After that, he began to cut down the monsters with deft movements. Olivia, meanwhile, attacked them with her claws. She threw one of the monsters straight into a wooden post. The impact was so strong that the pole cracked and began to fall. He fell with a huge crash, and the boys barely had time to jump back. They didn't understand what had happened. Suddenly they saw that an orc was nailed to this post. He was crucified on this pole, and this surprised the boys very much. However, when they looked up, they saw something even more terrifying. They noticed that there was a monster nailed to each post. John realized that they were so caught up in the battle that they didn't even notice. These creatures didn't care whether they were monsters or people. They killed everyone. And suddenly Alice saw something that left her in indescribable shock. She was so shocked that she didn't notice how the monster jumped on top of her. Seeing his girlfriend in danger, John screamed. But at the last moment, someone shot at the monster. It turned out it was Ben who used the gun. John praised him, although he did not understand what had happened. Alice behaved very strangely. She cried and fell on her knees. Suddenly, Chris said that apparently he had found a way out of the situation. All this time, he watched the siren with the help of a raven. This siren, in his opinion, could control these creatures. Chris didn't know what she was saying, but when she opened her mouth, something strange happened. These fish-headed monsters began to move. Therefore, if you kill the siren, the rest of the monsters will retreat without a commander. John decided they should try it, but he doubted they would give them a chance to get close to her. Then Mike asked if it was really necessary to just kill the siren. He then firmly stated that he would be the one to do it, because he had a plan. Meanwhile, the siren commanded the monsters to begin a new attack. John realized that they were changing formation. They realized that the guys were aiming for the siren. However, Mike told them that they could rely on him. If they provoke the monsters, it will give them an advantage. So he asked the guys to just clear the way for him. Meanwhile, Julia said that she would protect Alice. After this, Chris, John, and Ben went ahead to kill the monsters. They coordinated their attacks and dealt with them quite quickly. After this, John commanded Mike to attack. He readied his halberd to launch it forward. He launched a loaded gun straight towards the siren. At some point, the woman froze in surprise. But when the halberd approached her, she deftly dodged it. The boys were horrified when they realized that their plan had failed. Siren, meanwhile, laughed loudly at their attempts to kill her. However, Mike said with a smile that he had a plan in case he lost his spear. However, John did not understand what he was talking about. Mike asked him if he knew the best way to catch fish. At that moment, the halberd began to return straight to his hand. She flew straight through the body of the siren, who was not expecting such an attack. Then Mike said that the best way was to catch fish with a hook. As a result, the 34th level siren was defeated. The other monsters were horrified when they realized that their commander was dead. The boys noted that they immediately began to retreat back into the water. They were very happy that it all ended in the end. But now John was most concerned about Alice's condition. Julia didn't know what to do with it either. Then Alice suddenly said that her dad was hanging up there. John couldn't believe that his father-in-law could be there. He hoped until the very end that Alice had simply made a mistake. However, when he looked up, he saw a familiar badge on one of the corpses. He realized that it really was Alice's father. At that moment, the boys fell to their knees in despair. Directly above them hung a crucified man, Alice's father, Donald.